make way for our good buddy Ross Tucker, host of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. He works for CBS Sports and Westwood One. What do you make of that report there, Ross?
Doesn't shock me, Dan. I played with Coach Zimmer when I was in Dallas, have a lot of respect for him. Obviously, he was on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's a good coach. I think he's done a nice job in Minnesota, but it does feel like on some level it's run its course. Their defense is just simply not good enough. That's his expertise. That's his side of the ball. And Dan, they have arguably the best receiving tandem in the league. They have a really good back in Cook. Alexander Mattison is a stud when he plays. Cousins has played as a top 10 quarterback this year. They can't be 5-7. I mean, I don't know how you're 5-7 with all of the skill guys I just named. Clearly the defense and the O-line aren't good enough, but we've been saying that for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I always go back to this, and I say this a lot. Not every assistant coach is meant to be a head coach. That, Belichick is really rare, that he doesn't have personality, but he still has that attention to detail. He doesn't win press conferences. Pete Carroll wins a press conference. Sean McVay wins a press conference. But Mike Zimmer doesn't win a press conference, and he doesn't strike me as a guy who is going to lead you to the promised land where you go, I'm going to follow that guy. But if you say, hey, coach the defense, he strikes me as a guy that you want on your staff, not to be the head coach. Do you understand where I'm coming from here?
Yeah, I do. I will say, they went to the playoffs a lot of years in a row. They've won a decent amount of playoff games. Obviously, getting that NFC Championship game in 2017. I do think he's a head coach. Okay. I think he's a good head coach. Yep. I don't think he's a great one. And they have not been able to overcome some personnel issues on the defensive side of the ball, the offensive line. But they've tried for like 2, 3, 4 years now. And at a certain point, you have to say, let's give somebody else a shot.
And then you have the Steelers here with the farewell tour of Ben Roethlisberger, if it is the farewell tour of Ben Roethlisberger, that I don't know what happens if they make the playoffs. Like, does Ben, I guess he's made a decision according to Adam Schefter. Do you think it's over, that Ben is not going to play no matter what happens the rest of this season?
So I'm kind of confused by this, Dan. I know there were reports last week that Roethlisberger is privately telling people that it's his last year. I thought we kind of knew this was his last year. When they redid his contract, he took less money for this year, all the other years void. I thought we all knew it was his last year. Like, I thought that was the deal. They signed Mason Rudolph to a 1-year extension through 2022. I didn't really think last week's news was actually news. I thought we all knew this was Big Ben's last dance, last chance, and that's the way it always was going to be. And the way it's played out this year, it should be his last year.
But do you see them? I don't think his successor's on that roster.
No, I think that they have Mason Rudolph extended for 1 year as sort of the floor for what they can have. Worst case scenario for them right now, it's Rudolph and Haskins potentially battling out for that spot if they're not able to get some other veteran or anybody in the draft. They're not going to draft high enough to get, one of the 2 or 3 guys that people seem to like, although nobody's in love or enamored with any of these guys. It'd be ironic if they had Kenny Pickett just stay in the exact same stadium. Obviously, every Steelers fan I know here in Pennsylvania is like, oh, we're getting Russell Wilson, dude, or Aaron Rodgers. It's so funny, Dan, whether it's college football and like the Notre Dame alums or Oklahoma fans or the NFL, everybody has an overinflated sense of the worth of their team or their school. Like the Steelers fans around here, they're just like, yeah, I mean, it depends on who we want, whether it's Russell or Rodgers. Like in their mind, all of these guys want to play for the Steelers because they're the Steelers. I don't really think that's the case. I'm sure they'll make the call and see if those guys would want to play in Pittsburgh, but I don't think it's as open and shut as Steelers fans seem to think it is. Just like Oklahoma Notre Dame fans can't fathom the idea that a coach would leave their school to go to another college football program.
If you were an offensive lineman for Pitt and Kenny Pickett decided he didn't want to play in the Peach Bowl, how would you feel?
I think I would understand it. I would be disappointed if, he wasn't going to play, because obviously he makes a huge difference in whether or not you win. You've had an enjoyable season. It's the first time Pitt's been in a big bowl game in a while. I think I would be disappointed, but ultimately understand it. I think it's interesting. I used to work with Ed McCaffrey, Dan, on the radio, and he told me, remember, Christian McCaffrey was the first guy to skip a bowl game, right? The first guy. And Ed said something really interesting to me, that when they kind of laid out the pros and cons, Christian McCaffrey actually talked to his teammates. He said, hey, look, I'm supposedly a top 10 pick. I could play in the Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas, which sounds funny now, and play with you guys. But if I get hurt, like what happened to Jalen Smith in the Fiesta Bowl, you never know. And what Ed said to me, what I thought was really interesting, his teammates were all like, you better not play. You'd be an absolute moron if you play with us in the Sun Bowl. So I think guys are at the point now where they kind of understand a little bit more. It does feel weird for whatever reason when it's a quarterback and it's a guy that's led a program like Pitt to a place they haven't been in a while. If he was at Alabama or Georgia and played a different position, we wouldn't even think twice about it.
The reaction's been interesting, though. The last 24 hours, Vegas, took it from a 3.5 point spread down to a pick 'em. Just the reaction of people that you got to play in a bowl game, or you shouldn't play in a bowl game, or he has every right to sit out if he wants to. Plus, I wonder, when he was on the show yesterday, if the reaction is going to almost force him to play. That like, how can you do, if he's on the fence, I wonder if all this criticism makes him go. And I don't know if he's even not playing in the bowl game. I just got a sense, and that's why I asked him the question.
Yeah, so two things on that. Number one, I do think people look at the quarterback position a little bit differently from a leadership standpoint, and I wonder how that will be looked at by some NFL teams. I don't think many, but there might be a few that don't love it. Number one. Number two, next time, Dan, you're going to ask him a question like that, can you have Fritzy or somebody text me before the line moves by 3.5 points? That would really be a good one for me to get the heads up on, before Vegas does.
You know what, Fritzy, would you write that down next time I ask a question that could affect the betting line?
So noted.
Let Ross know. The Eagles quarterbacking situation, I find it interesting. Now, maybe it's not that interesting, but Gardner Minshew, to me, can play. He's a better quarterback than Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is a better weapon, and there's a difference in that. But I don't know if there's any quarterback controversy in Philadelphia, a team you know very well.
Right. Yeah, I do their pregame, and I spend a lot of time on WIP there in Philadelphia. The first thing is, how is it possible, Dan, that none of these other teams traded a 6th-round pick?
I agree.
For Gardner Minshew at the end. I mean, the Eagles had Hurts. They had Flacco. They traded a 6th-round pick for Minshew to be the third. We got guys like Tim Boyle starting NFL games for the Detroit Lions, and nobody wanted to give more than that for Minshew. Now, I personally don't think there's any controversy regarding who starts the next game. Hurts has been on a steady progression. He's played well overall. The Giants game was his worst game, and that's the last time out, so he has to play better. What I find really interesting, though, is what this means for Nick Sirianni, the first-year head coach. What happens if Hurts struggles in the next game against Washington? I mean, they have 4 games left. If they go 3-1 or better, they're going to the playoffs. This creates an interesting dilemma for Sirianni. If Hurts struggles like he did against the Giants, does he give him the whole game? Does he give him the first series of the third quarter? Does he? I mean, it's not about, in my mind, who starts the next game. It's how quick of a hook does Hurts have if he performs poorly?
We're talking to Ross Tucker, host of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, and he'll be on the call for Army-Navy. That'll be on Westwood 1 this Saturday. and that'll be at 3 Eastern. Your 6th Army-Navy game? Does that sound right?
Favorite day of the year. Yep, I did 3 on the sideline with James Lofton and Mayock in the booth, and then this will be my 3rd time in the booth. Dan, my single favorite day of the year. It's funny. I'm from near Philadelphia, and that's where the game's usually played. And people said my whole upbringing, you got to go to Army Navy, got to go to Army Navy. And I was always kind of like, yeah, I'm sure it's great. But like, I was a Penn State fan, whatever. I had no idea. The thing I tell people is it's a bucket list item. And that if, we obviously live in a pretty divisive society. We all know that it's polarizing. There's not a lot of respect between certain people. If you want to have a day where you just feel like we're all on the same team, we're all in this together, and feel better about our country, the Army-Navy game, that's where it's at, man. You go in that stadium and you're just like, like we're going to be okay. Because even though they're trying to kill each other on the field, everybody in that stadium knows we're ultimately on the same team. We're ultimately in this together. I would like if our country could get back to that, remembering like we're not political parties, like we're all Americans. We're all in this together. That'd be nice.
Yeah, it's emotional. It is. It's emotional. Anytime I've gone to West Point, and even now thinking about it, when those cadets come in, and you realize we talk about, boy, this game is life and death. No, they're in a game that's life and death. This is fun for them. Army-Navy is really important, but their bigger picture is, they move on to something that is truly life and death. And when you see them come in, it's as if you put everything to the side, and it's a wonderful moment. And I'm envious of you. You're going to be there this Saturday.
Yeah, Dan, you just describing that just gave me chills, because the thing is, inside the stadium, it's a lot of alums, it's parents, and obviously it's all the midshipmen and the cadets. Everybody in there has sacrificed on some level, right? Even if it's a family member that goes in the service, they miss a lot of holidays. They miss a lot. Everybody in there, in one way, shape, or form, has sacrificed for the rest of us to be able to do what we can do. And I'm in awe of the 18-year-olds that sign up for 9 years, from 18 to 27 at a minimum. They're going to live a different life than the rest of us live. Can't thank any of them enough. And I tell everybody, anytime you see a serviceman or woman, say thank you. It's incredible.
Thank you, buddy. Great to talk to you. Have fun this weekend.
Thank you. Take care.
That's Ross Tucker. Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports, Army-Navy coming up this weekend.